many different things that people use for mulch, and so I'm going to try and cover as much as possible. I have a bunch of different samples here so that you can touch and see the difference between some of them. One of the big ones I really wanted to hit on is the difference between hay and straw, because a lot of people just use those words interchangeably. You'll even see that with people who are selling hay and selling straw, that they'll use both words or call it mulch hay or mulch straw. And it's like, okay, when you go to purchase, I want people to know that there is a difference and this is what the difference is. And so we'll spend a little bit of time. This is a bale of hay. It's low quality hay, so there is that, but you will see a difference between this and we're gonna, at the end of the class, go do some mulching on a row of dahlias with a bale of straw, and you'll see a major difference between the two. We're also going to spend a lot of time talking about how you decide what kind of mulch to use. There's also layering of mulches. Like sometimes you use one mulch for a certain purpose and then you'll use another mulch for a different purpose, and we'll talk about why those different things happen. And then at the end we'll talk about like how to apply different mulches and when to apply them. So this is some composted horse manure. You can use raw horse manure. I do not suggest using raw manure ever because of contaminants, but some people do. Well composted manure, you can totally spread that on things and harvest right away. There shouldn't be any problems as long as it's well composted. And one of the things you want to see is that you're not seeing the horse, horses, their poop kind of looks like biscuits. You're not seeing that in well composted manure anymore. Another sign that we like to see is you can see some worms in there. In our area, it's pretty easy to find horse manure, especially. Not Craigslist, the Facebook Marketplace, you can look up compost or manure, and often you can find someone who's just giving it away for free. There's also places that you can purchase it, but my preference is always the free option. This is some municipal leaves. I just wanted to show you because when we get municipal leaves, sometimes we can find things that are not leaves in them. This is pretty minor. My sister's gotten leaves and found knives, glass. So like it can be a good resource. It's free, but there's also those kinds of things. You can also be dealing with like oil from cars that leaked on the street if they're picking them up off the street. So those are things to consider. It's a lovely resource. It's free. It can take nitrogen away from your plants. So it's something to be aware of. If you're mixing it into the soil like lasagna farming, it can steal nitrogen from the plants. If it's put on top of the soil, that's not usually a problem because the worms and different critters that break it down are coming up to take it into the soil rather than like it being in the soil and everybody just going after it. Because all of these high carbon, so in composting they call them the brown materials, they're high carbon. They take a lot of nitrogen in order to break them down. So in my personal garden, we did a hugel mound, which is where you kind of dig a trench, put wood in it, fill it with dirt, put wood, fill it with dirt, put wood. So it's great in that it like holds a lot of moisture for you, but it robs nitrogen from, like we're putting a ton of manure, composted manure on it, and it's still robbing nitrogen from our tomatoes. And so like some places are doing like really fabulous because maybe the wood was more broken down, but other places it's like the tomatoes looked great and now they're like losing their vigor, they're turning a little on the yellow side, they're not soaking up moisture. And what that does is it makes it so that they can't uptake other nutrients. So we're also having a problem with blossom end rot, which is a lack of calcium. And if they don't have the nitrogen, they can't uptake the calcium. If they don't have water, they can't uptake the calcium. So like all of those things are just compounding. And so that's one of those learning curves for us is like, yeah, the hugelkultur thing can be great, but you have to be aware that it will rob nitrogen from your plants in some ways. This is pine needles. Pine needles can make a really good mulch. One of the things that makes them so great is that they're fairly small in size and they don't compact really well. They kind of push and hold each other apart so you get air in there. So then water can penetrate and air can penetrate, so you're not like making an anaerobic situation right at the ground level. They do add an acidic, so your soils can become more acidic, which is great for certain things like blueberries that like a more acidic soil. But there's other things, a lot of things like kind of a more neutral pH. So you got to be aware that if you're adding something like pine needles, you're going to change the pH, you're going to lower it, and some things will not like that. I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with bark mulch. It can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. This is a pretty ground up one. These can be really lovely. They make a nice look over the top of your garden. They're not necessarily adding nutrients. Not a problem if that's what you're going for. The look is really lovely. If it gets mixed into your soil, it is going to start robbing a little bit of nitrogen, but especially if it's ground up like this, it's not going to be robbing a lot of nitrogen. So it's just going back to, we have to think about what we're trying to do. This I brought for a comparison. This is compost from yard debris, and this is from a commercial composting facility. You can see that it still has a lot of these twigs and things. It has plenty of nitrogen in there, so like that continuing to break down is not going to be robbing any nitrogen from your plants. It looks great if you're trying to go for a look on top of the soil. You can also mix it in. It has it's got lots of different nutrients, so mixing it in is going to be great. Putting it on top is going to be great. And these things, when they get mixed into the soil or on top of the soil, are really going to help water penetrate, but also stay. I think a lot of people are familiar with clay soils, especially around here. They get wet, they expand, get really mushy, get really slimy, but then they dry out and you get that caking and cracking. And so then when you add water, it goes into the cracks and just kind of drains away. So anything like these on top of the soil, any of these mulches are going to really help that moisture stay in your clay, which will help it keep that nice smooth look where it's all touching instead of cracking. It's going to help it so that the water's not just running away. It's going to allow water to penetrate, but like kind of stay right there in the root zone rather than draining away or just running off. A lot of people have that experience, like I'm watering and my water's just running away, so it must be fine because it's not fully penetrated. You have a caking happening on your soil. Some of these things become hydrophobic when they dry out, which means that they don't attract water anymore. They're actually pushing the water away. So you have to get them really wet in order for them to attract the water again. Otherwise, it's just going to start running off. And mulch, that's what mulch is really great for, is that it doesn't really cake. Sometimes these kinds of things will cake, but the leaves, the pine needles, straw, these things won't cake. It'll really help that water get in there and stop it from just running off. Over here we have more of like weed barrier type mulches. I brought this one as an example because I think it's a really terrible option because it literally just rips. So like you're gonna get weeds and they're gonna like push through and they're just gonna go like that. And then it's like, well, what was even the point? So if you're going for weed suppression, like a lot of these like plastic woven things are great for that. just, you know, try and touch it and see, like, is it really going to work or is it not? Because this thing, I don't even know why people would pay money for that. I'm not sure what this could be good for. I'm sure someone found a use, but I don't know what it is. These, if you're going for weed suppression, this is a woven plastic fabric. These are really great for weed suppression. We can take a look over here at the strawberries that Carrie has here at Daily Blessings Farm. And you can see these strawberries are planted in a similar fabric, and the weed pressure in her strawberries is very minimal where she has them planted on this. It's really great for that. These woven ones do allow some water to penetrate, but you might need like a drip system so that the water's getting right there where your plants are. But I brought this one as an example to show you some of them, like Carrie's. If we go look at, you can lift up the end and you can see that it's smooth on both sides. Some of them are rough on one side, and I don't know what the purpose of that is, but what I do know is that things get caught in this. You can see that, you know, all of this stuff is getting caught, but also all of the organisms that are in your soil that you're really wanting to be there to, you know, break down your mulch, break down the organic matter to release nutrients for your plants, they get stuck in this, and they will get stuck and die in that rather than being able to help your soils. So this particular one, not really the best option if you're in like a garden space that you're trying to grow things. It gets used in nurseries as like a ground cover to keep the weeds down where they're trying to grow things above ground. They don't care about what's going on beneath the soil. So that can be a great option, but it's just something to think about when you're picking out your mulch. Like, this isn't really helping your garden if it's got this kind of thing happening. This I brought as an example of plastic that gets used. Plastic can be used for a lot of reasons. Clear plastic is often used to allow weeds to germinate, and then it really heats up the soil underneath, so your weeds will germinate and then they die. And so if you're really trying to get rid of a really weedy area, clear plastic can be a great option. There's lots of different types of clear plastic that you can use. You can go to like a Home Depot or an Ace Hardware and get plastic sheeting is what it's often called. Usually it's like in the painting section, and there's different thicknesses. So if you want it to last a few years, you can get a thicker one. The thinner ones will break down by the sun. So that's just something to be aware of if you want to reuse it, that you'll need a thicker one. It's the same thing with, there's dark plastics that are used a lot in commercial farming. They're used similarly to this plastic here, but they're more like they get dug up and then relaid each year. And those are the same thing, like the sun will break them down, and so like pulling them up can be difficult. So it's just something to think about. If you're wanting to reuse, then getting a thicker, higher quality plastic is going to be a great option. Sometimes, you know, you want to just lay it down to remove the weeds in an area so that you can come through and like garden in that space later. So like you can use regular tarps. Used billboards are a great option because they're so thick. Those can be gotten fairly inexpensively. Lots of different things can be used as a tarp situation. They'll suppress, well, not, they allow the weeds to germinate, but then like the ones that are blocking the sun, they will suppress the weeds because the weeds won't be able to grow without the sunlight. They do heat up the ground, so that's also something to just keep in mind. Sometimes that's great at the beginning of the season and the end of the season when you're wanting to like extend your season. They can really help keep the soil from freezing, which helps your plants grow a little bit longer, or like your strawberries get started a little bit earlier. So when we talk about what your goals are for why you're choosing a mulch. Those are things to be thinking about. What is the end that I'm trying to accomplish? Another thing to be aware of with tarping is that if you have rodents on your property, they like that dark space. They will find your tarps and they will make their homes under your tarps. So I do know one farm that uses this to their advantage. So they keep tarps in the walkways. So then the rodents are all in the walkways and not under their plants. It also allows water to travel more easily in those ways. So if you're trying to direct water, that can be a great way to get some aeration from the rodents. It's just, you know, you have to decide where the priorities are, what your goals are. This is the jute or hemp, I'm not sure which one, gunny sack material, burlap sack material. These can be great. They're also like, you can see through it. So, you know, how much is it really doing? What are you trying to accomplish? If you're trying to suppress weeds, that's not really going to do it. Maybe doubled up it will. But sometimes you can find these really cheap. They are biodegradable, so they can go and just be set down. Other options similar to that would be like cardboard or newspaper. If you're really trying to suppress weeds, those can be some biodegradable options that you can lay down. I recommend if you're using those options that you're also putting something on top of them. They can dry out easily. The more flat your mulch is, the more easily it will dry out. So if you put cardboard down, that can be great for suppressing weeds for a time. But if you're not keeping it moist, it dries out and then it like curves up and does funny things. But it can be a great addition to, say, straw, where you're laying down the cardboard or the newspaper as a weed suppressant, and then you add straw on top. That can really help keep the cardboard moist. It can help it not dry out because you have all that layer between the sun and the air and then the cardboard and the ground. So layering is a really great option. Sometimes like these weed barriers, you just are wanting to suppress the weeds. So this is the way, like, you just keep them from being able to grow. And then you put your mulch on top of that. A lot of people do those kinds of things. There's nothing wrong with that, but just be aware that you are creating a layer that roots aren't going to penetrate. And so you'll end up with weed seeds that land on your mulch on top, and then they're just spreading out across your mulch, which can make them sometimes easier to pull, sometimes harder to pull. Sometimes it's like you pull the weed and there goes all your mulch with the roots because they're just on top of the weed barrier. So it's just, you know, once again, like, what are we trying to accomplish? This is hay, and I wanted to show you hay because, like I said earlier, some people call hay and straw like interchangeably, but they can look a lot alike on the outside, especially if they've been sitting in the sun. They'll turn golden like this. Hay should be green on the inside, and like I said, this is low quality hay, so it's not as green as it should be. It also got a little bit wet and then sat, so it's a little moldy. So don't feed moldy hay to your animals. Really bad idea, but fine for your garden. One of the things that hay is going to be these long strands because they took the whole plant and just baled the whole thing. And that's fine. It's just sometimes it's harder to work with. It doesn't come apart when you're like trying to like, you know, make a nice little pile of mulch around your plant. Sometimes it doesn't work as well because it's these long pieces. You can also see there are some weed grasses in here that have the seed heads on them, so they can have seeds in them. Sometimes that's a problem. A lot of times hay is cut before the seeds have formed, but if there's weeds in there, you know, they could have already formed seeds, and you don't know. The thing with straw is that they've gone through and harvested the seeds. So usually you're getting rice or wheat or barley or something like that. They've grown that crop for the seed. And so they've come through, they've harvested the seed, and in that process, they've cut off the crop, so it's like this, and it goes through the combine and gets all beat up, and so you end up with pieces that are more like this, and they're a lot easier to deal with once they've been broken down like that. A lot of the grain has been removed. There are, if you go to a garden store, you can get what is certified weed-free straw, which has gone through a process to make sure that the seeds aren't going to grow. If you get straw from a farmer, there may or may not be some seeds in there left over from whatever crop it was. So like wheat, it might still have some wheat berries in your straw. One way you can deal with that is you can buy it one year and get it wet enough that it sprouts. And then you can start using it, because as you pull it apart once it's sprouted, then those sprouts are mostly going to die. And then you significantly decrease any problems that you have from weed seed or from the seed from whatever crop it was grown for. So, and ground covers can be a great mulching strategy. So I brought some samples of, like, this is a Corsican mint, this is woolly thyme, this is blue star creeper, oregano, that's a lime thyme, this is an ice plant, and then these are some different succulents. And so these are like a permanent solution for a ground cover for keeping things moist. Sometimes these work really well in like a perennial garden if you're growing, say, some blueberries or some other shrub types, or even in a flower garden. These can be really great on the ground. They all are very low growing, and they'll act as a mulch. They'll keep the soil from caking. They'll allow water to penetrate. They will help keep the soil more moist. The succulents can be really great because they'll soak up all that water when it's there, but then they're a little more drought tolerant. The thymes are actually really nice for that too, because they're very drought tolerant. Along the same lines is you can grow different cover crops as a living mulch. You know, sometimes it's like in your pathways. You want somewhere that you can walk and don't care about squishing the plants, but it will also, you know, help keep that moisture around. Clovers are really good for that, but there are lots of different cover crops that you can look at for those kind of things. Also in like the off season, so you've finished your garden, but now you need something to just, you know, you don't want the water just running and like pulling all your nutrients off your garden. So a cover crop is really great in the winter time. So you would be seeding it in the fall, so then it will come up in your garden space. It'll be able to catch more of the water as it's raining in the off season. And then in the spring, you can till it into the ground. So you're adding organic matter and putting those nutrients back into your soil. So as far as cover crops are concerned, a lot of times you're doing that. You're seeding in the fall, like when the rains first start. The soil gets nice and moist. You go out there, spread your cover crop, and then let it grow over the winter. You're either chop and drop or tilling it into the soil in the spring, and then you're ready to garden. You would put the plastic down right before you want to plant, and then you plant directly into it, and then it just stays for years. If you are wanting to keep the moisture in your soil, then after you've planted and things are established, that's when I would suggest mulching. But you can lay your mulch down and then plant into it if your plants are big enough. You don't want to smother them with your mulch. So it's kind of depends on the weather and what your goals are. So you definitely want to be doing it before it gets super hot. So we had that 100 degrees that lasted for, or over 100 degrees that lasted for a week. And like on our farm, like everything just was drying out like crazy. And so we went out there and we did both the composted manure and the straw. One, because the composted manure with the straw, like that combination will help with the whole breaking down the straw, not robbing nutrients from your plants. Also, the composted manure, like it will dry out and get that hydrophobic I was telling you about, but the straw doesn't. So if you put that over the top, it really helps with that. But we saw major improvements in all of our plants, and it was immediate because that moisture just stayed right there at the surface instead of just going away. So it's kind of, before you see a problem is the best time. As soon as you see a problem, that's the next best time. So you can do any of these things at any point in time. Okay. The best time is before you see a problem. It's also nice to let your plants get tall enough that when you do put the mulch, it's not going to suffocate them. So a lot of people aren't aware that you can suffocate plants. This often happens with trees, is people want to put that mulch right up next to the trunk, and that actually can suffocate the plant. Like a lot of trees need like the airspace around their trunk. So you really want the mulch out here, kind of like a pool around the trunk just so that it can breathe. So like some of it depends on timing of like when things are available. Like straw is just starting to become available. Hay is becoming available. So like now's actually the time to buy it for next year. So if you want to mulch at the beginning of the season when you're planting things, like now is the time to buy it. Like we were trying to get a hold of rice straw because rice is very different than wheat. So like wheat, oats, barley, they're kind of waxy and they'll have a tendency to mat. Whereas rice straw, it has all these tiny little hairs on the stem. And so it doesn't mat as much as those other cereal grains will. And so rice straw can be really nice for that it will stay fluffy longer. It also breaks down a little bit better because it's not, when things mat, they create more of an anaerobic situation. A lot of those microorganisms that are actually doing the breaking down, they need that oxygen. And so if you create that anaerobic situation, you'll get high bacteria, which can cause odors. It can also cause it to just be a nasty nightmare as far as like it gets slimy, it gets just waterlogged, which can suffocate your plants. So it's all things to be just like thinking about, like what are we really trying to do? We did that with the straw in the pathways in our garden, put like the mat, you know how this flakes, when you take hay apart or straw bales apart, they come off in these flakes. Well, we were having some weed issues in our pathways. So that's what we did, is you put a flake down and you put another flake down. It makes a nice little pathway, and the weeds are not coming through that, at least not anytime soon. But if you're doing that around your plants, you might be suffocating them, which is definitely not something that we want to do. Some people really tout mushroom compost, which is basically what's left over after they have fruited the mushrooms. Sometimes it's broken down into compost, sometimes it's not. There is some scientific study data that shows that high fungal content in your compost is more beneficial to your plants than high bacterial content. And the way that commercial compost is composted, it creates a very bacterial situation, and so it has a high bacterial content, low fungal content. There are ways to compost that increase the mycelium, which is the mushroom compost, and that has shown that it is better for the plants because a lot of mushrooms make relationships with the plants. They call them mycorrhizal connections. There's endo and ecto. One goes into the root and it kind of extends the root. The other goes on the outside and does the same thing, extends the root. Because there are a ton of nutrients in soil. Even when you have a soil that you think has like no nutrients, there's a ton of nutrients. They're just locked up in ways that the plants can't actually access them. And so the mushrooms, they have enzymes that they put out into the environment that breaks things down, and then they can eat that, and then they share that with the plants, and the plants share with them the sugars that they make through the photosynthesis. So a lot of those mushrooms are going to be really great for your plants. Sometimes you will find a mushroom that is a problem for your plants. You just have to pay attention to, like, when you see a mushroom and a plant that's like not doing well, like, you know, I wouldn't automatically say this caused that, but you know, those are things to just watch and observe and see if it continues to be a problem, or they could be totally unrelated. There are some parasitic mushrooms that can cause problems with certain plants. Those are not very common, and they tend to be very specific to the plant or the tree that they're a parasite for. Most of what you're going to find growing out of cardboard is going to be decomposing mushrooms that are only going to be living on dead material. So if you go like in this patch right here where we have the wood chips, if you go dig in there, you don't have to dig very far. You'll see the white mycelium strings all through here. They're just decomposing the wood chips. And that's what you're getting in the cardboard. This I just called a quick reference guide. The colors don't necessarily mean one is good and one is bad. It's just saying that this can have this effect and this one can't have this effect, or vice versa. For example, there's one that says increases ground temperature. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, because like we talked about with this plastic, it increases the ground temperature, but it also can mean that you're getting strawberries sooner in the year because you're alleviating the frost and the frozen ground temperatures. It can also be like you lay down your tarp to warm up the ground so that then you can plant into it earlier. Mediates ground temperature is more like when you're putting the straw on and it's going to shade the ground so that it's not that hot sun at 105 degrees is not just burning the ground right where the root zone is, which will really help with water stress and just heat stress on your plants. So that's just like a quick reference guide. So this is a compressed bale. When you get it from a farmer in the field, you'll get a bale more like that. These weigh about the same. So straw bales, when they come as a bale, they're usually like 2-string or 3-string. I generally tell people it's about 20 to 25 pounds per string. So 2 strings is going to be about 40 pounds. 3 strings, now you're getting into like 75 pounds, and that gets to be a bit much for a lot of people. But these compressed bales, they have about the same amount of straw as like that one does. They just super compress it. And you see how this just flakes away. So this is a lot easier to work with as far as like those really long pieces. They don't go around things very nicely, but this, you can easily just shake it into place. So compressed, you're going to get at a store. You're going to pay a lot more for it. It also, they go through a sterilization process. So if there had been seeds in here before, there's not going to be seeds anymore. Especially like they say certified noxious weed free, because that's a lot of what they're concerned about is like spreading the noxious weeds that we really don't want. But it's also going to take care of, like, this is wheat. So if you were to find some wheat berries in here, they've been sterilized. They're not going to grow anymore. So a lot of people will go like this, and that's like how they mulch. That's not much. It's not going to do a lot. Like, you got to get a nice amount. Like, so you see how compressed that was. Like, this is going to compress over time. So like this, right now it's like 2 to 3 inches. It's going to be like 1 inch within a short amount of time. So it, once again, depends on what you're going for. The more you put on here, the more likely you'll get the weed suppression. The less you put on there, you're not going to get that weed suppression, but you know, what are you going for? Like, this is the biggest thing with mulch. What is your goal? Start with what is the end that I'm trying to accomplish, and then look at the different options they have. If you want nutrients, compost is going to be like your best bet for nutrients, but it's not going to be your best bet for, say, holding the moisture. Yes, it's going to hold moisture. It also will get somewhat hydrophobic, and so then it'll cause it to run off, which will also cause your nutrients to run off. So like I said, we do the manure underneath and then the straw on top, because it is really going to help hold moisture. And in our environment, that's a really important piece. So if you all want to jump in and touch the straw and try, you know, see how it goes with falling apart and flaking away and